Let's concur. I'm glad to get the time to raise this very important issue with the Minister. And this residential zone land tax is having a very adverse effect on farmers, especially dairy farmers close to our towns in the county of Kerry. I'm sure it is happening all around the country. But places like Killarney, Tralee, Listowel, Castle Island. But go back to Killarney. Many of these farmers haven't slept since they got notification, I think it was the start of April, that they were liable for this zoned land tax. Even though some of these farmers are classified as strategic reserve, which means that you have existing residential and infill residential and proposed residential. All them categories should be dealt with first. Even strategic reserve, you're not even entitled to get planning. You'd have to do a material contravention, and the council would have to agree to do it before planning would or could be granted. And there are plenty of other land. Just take Killarney alone. Kerry County Council owns lands in Deer Park, and they own public lands. Public lands is owned by the HSE in St. Finnians, which they got from Kerry County Council in the first place. It should go back to Kerry County Council to build social housing. We've been agitating for that for years. So what I'm saying to Minister, this residential loan tax was land tax was designed and brought in to deal with speculators and would-be developers in Dublin, Cork, Limerick and other cities. But certainly there are plenty of other places to build in and around Kerry and Killarney without doing this terrible deed to people, making them to pay this tax. Some of them are told that it will be up to 100,000 a year. God Almighty, Minister, even if their places were worth $1 million, they won't own them after a short few years, and they'll be totally wiped out with this tax. And it reminds me of the song, the rent and taxes were so high I could not them redeem, and that's the cruel reason why I left old Skibbereen. Are they going to do that to these people that have given their lives and built up enterprises? Some of these are farming going back 3 generations. In Killarney, they supplied Killarney dairies ever before there was Kerry Co-op. And they have their places built up, environmentally friendly. They're producing the best milk and beef that you could expect in any part of the world. And are they going to be wiped out? Active farmers, I'm asking you, Minister, and to go back to the Department of Finance where this is coming from, and the Department of Housing, because it is wrong. There are several other ways and several other things you should be doing if there's a shortage of houses, but not to force farmers who are actively farming. Treat them, and there has to be a distinction or an exemption made for these active farmers, and that's what I'm asking. And I'm glad to get the opportunity here to raise this very serious matter. Some of these farmers haven't slept, and they're after tough times and trying to survive in the last number of years with Brexit and every other kind of a problem that has hit them nationally. So I'm appealing to Minister.
Thanks, Les Corla, and I'm taking this for Minister Darragh O'Brien, who isn't here tonight. I'd like to thank Deputy Healy-Rae for his question regarding the application of the residential zone tax, land tax, to farmlands. The Finance Act of 2021 introduced Part 22A of the Residential Zoned Land Tax into Tax Consolidation Act of 1997. It is designed to prompt residential development by landowners, including farmers, of land that is zoned for residential or mixed use, including residential purposes that is serviced. It is important to note that to come within the scope of the RZLT, farmland must be both zoned and fit for residential use and be serviced or have access to services. Farmland that is zoned for residential use but which is not currently serviced is not within the scope of the tax and will only come within the scope of the tax should the land become serviced at some point in the future. Within the Irish planning system, the county or city development plan is the principal planning strategy document for the development of a local authority area over a 6-year statutory time period. The development plan gives special expression to the physical, economic, social and environmental needs of the community in order to support and regulate new development, enhance amenities and protect the environment. Residential zonings contained within the development plan, which provide the basis for the application of the tax measure, from part of the adoption of the plan by the elected members, having regard to the need to accommodate sufficient land for housing development over the lifetime of the plan. Land will be considered to be serviced for the purposes of the tax where it is reasonable to consider that the land has access to or may be connected to public infrastructure and facilities, including roads and footpaths, public lighting, foul sewer, drainage, surface water drainage and public water supply necessary for dwellings to be developed on the land, and sufficient service capacity available for each development. Agricultural land which is zoned solely for primarily for residential use and is serviced meets the criteria set out within the legislation and therefore falls scope of the tax. Agricultural land that is zoned for a mixture of uses including residential is not in scope, as farming is a trade or profession benefiting from an exemption in the legislation. These zonings are considered to reflect the housing need set out within the core strategy for the relevant local authority area, and landowners within such zonings may fall within the scope of the tax in the interest of ensuring an appropriate supply of housing on zoned lands. A draft RZLT map was published by each local authority on the 1st of November. The purpose of the draft was to allow landowners, including farmers, to see if their land is within the scope of the tax. If a landowner sees that their land is included on the draft and believes that it should not be, they had the opportunity to make a submission to the local authority by the 1st of January, seeking to have the map updated and to have their land removed. Local authorities will have now considered the submissions received and have made determinations on whether the land should stay on the map or be removed from it. If the landowner disagrees with the determination of the council, they can appeal to An Bord Pleanála. If a landowner requested a rezoning of their land, the local authority would consider the request and, if appropriate, they would commence a variation procedure to alter the zoning of the land, as Deputy Healy-Rae said. The variation procedure and the local authority's decision on whether or not to commence one is part of normal zoning processes. It is acknowledged that the tax will impact on landowners. However, if the land in question is zoned for a particular purpose under a plan adopted by the local authority and has been subject to investment by the local authority and the state in services necessary to enable the development for housing to accommodate increased population, it is intended that the land should be used for housing. The tax measure is a key pillar of the government's response to address the urgent need to increase housing supply.
Thank you, Minister, for the reply, but I have read all that verse that you read out there before, but look, they're after being notified by the local authority that are liable for the tax. Even those that are zoned strategic residential reserve. And that's very wrong, Minister. These are active farmers, and you see, there's no demand. It's recognised that there is no demand for this development land around Killarney. There is no demand there. So by the time, maybe in 20 years' time, if they'll have to wait that long, they mightn't still have their land sold, because we're waiting for a bypass. And some of these farmers, their only access is onto the national primary road, the N22, going to Killarney. And we know the traffic jams that are going in there. So if you had a housing estate in there, if you did have it there, you couldn't get out on the road any evening because we don't even have the bypass. So I'm saying to you, Minister, please, these people are contemplating going to Bord Pleanála. They have to go, but it is an expensive process. And I'm asking you, Minister, to ensure that they're not put through this, because active working farmers that are farming their lands and have been doing so for generations, they should not be put through this. They should be exempted. And to make a distinction between the big hoarders of land here in Dublin, where the problem is about housing. We have enough land that's owned by the County Council in Killarney at the present time to cater for the housing list that's there, even with St. Finn's land and other lands that the council have. And there's other pockets of land, smaller little pockets of land inside in the town of Killarney that could be built on. And when all them places are built in 20 years' time or so, he can come out to these fellas then and by agreement, but do not try to force them off their lands with this tax, because that's what you're trying to do, and that's what the government is trying to do. And I'm sorry that Darragh O'Brien isn't here to listen to me making this case, because he's wrong in going down this road. He's hurting people, and I was brought up to understand that you should never try to put one person or one community down up by putting the others down.
Thank you.
That's very wrong, and I'm asking you please to ensure that active farmers are exempted from this vacant land tax.
Thanks, Senator Corda, and thanks, Deputy Healy-Rae. And look, I know the issues that you're raising, and I can see that you feel very strongly about them. I know the matter has been raised previously in the House as well, and I know that Taoiseach has responded directly with regard to this, specifically in relation to, as you said, the tiers for different zoning matrices within towns. So what I'll ask is, the Minister to contact you directly to discuss the specifics that you have raised with him, because obviously I'm not familiar with him and I'm not in that department, but I'll ask the Minister to come back to you directly himself, Deputy Healy-Rae.
Thank you, Minister.